What drove Joseph Stalin to inflict unimaginable suffering on millions before and during World War II? Between the early 1930s and his death in 1953, Stalin had more than 1 million of his citizens executed. Millions more fell victim to forced labor, deportation, famine, bloody massacres, and detention and interrogation by Stalin's henchmen. From the devastating famine in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor, to the ruthless Great Purge that targeted political opponents and military leaders, Stalin's reign of terror left an indelible mark on history. So, what were the motivations behind these atrocities, and how did Stalin maintain his grip on power amid such chaos? Let's get started. And remember to let us know in the comments what topics you'd like us to cover next. Joseph Stalin, born Joseph Bessarionis Zhezhugashvili on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential and ruthless leaders in history. His early life was marked by hardship. He was born into a poor family. His father was a cobbler who struggled with alcoholism, and his mother was a devoutly religious laundress. Stalin's upbringing was harsh, with a tumultuous family life and limited education opportunities. Despite these challenges, Stalin proved to be a diligent student. He received a scholarship to attend the Tiflis Theological Seminary in 1894, where he was exposed to revolutionary ideas and Marxist literature. He soon joined the Missamdasia, a secret revolutionary group that advocated Georgian independence and socialism. By 1899, Stalin had fully embraced Marxist ideology and abandoned his theological studies to become a full-time revolutionary. Stalin's political activities led to multiple arrests and exiles in Siberia, but his dedication to the Bolshevik cause only grew stronger. He was a committed and cunning organizer, which earned him the attention of Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks. Stalin played a significant role in the Russian Revolution of 1917, leading to the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and establishing a socialist government. Following the revolution, Stalin was appointed to several key positions within the Bolshevik Party, including Commissar for Nationalities and later General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1922. The role of General Secretary, initially considered a bureaucratic post, gave Stalin significant control over party appointments and decisions, allowing him to build a loyal base of supporters within the party apparatus. After Lenin died in 1924, a power struggle ensued among the top Bolshevik leaders. Stalin, who was underestimated by many of his rivals, adeptly maneuvered through the political landscape to consolidate his power. Once in complete control, Stalin implemented radical policies to transform the Soviet Union into a modern industrial state. The Holodomor, meaning death by hunger in Ukrainian, was a man-made famine that occurred in Soviet Ukraine from 1932 to 1933. It directly resulted from Joseph Stalin's forced collectivization policies and grain requisitioning. In the late 1920s, Stalin launched a campaign to collectivize agriculture to consolidate individual farms into large state-controlled enterprises. This policy was intended to increase agricultural productivity, facilitate grain exports to fund industrialization, and tighten state control over the peasantry. Collectivization was met with widespread resistance from Ukrainian peasants, who were deeply attached to their land and traditional way of life. In response, the Soviet government implemented brutal measures to crush opposition. Wealthier peasants, known as kulaks, were targeted as class enemies. Many were executed, deported to labor camps, or forcibly relocated to remote areas. Concurrently, the Soviet state imposed exorbitant grain requisition quotas on Ukrainian farmers. These quotas were often unrealistic and left little or no food for the peasants. The authorities confiscated not only grain but also foodstuffs and livestock, exacerbating the food shortage. Those who resisted or were accused of hiding grain were subject to severe punishment, including arrest, deportation, and execution. The impact of these policies was catastrophic. By the winter of 1932 to 1933, food supplies in Ukraine had dwindled to critical levels. The confiscation of grain and other foodstuffs left the rural population with nothing to eat. Starvation became widespread, and millions of Ukrainians began to die. The famine's toll was devastating. Estimates of the death toll vary, but it's generally accepted that between 3 to 7 million people perished as a result of the Holodomor. Entire villages were decimated, and the demographic and cultural fabric of Ukraine was profoundly affected. The famine led to severe social disintegration, with reports of desperate measures including theft, violence, and even cannibalism. The Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror, was a period of intense political repression in the Soviet Union from 1936 to 1938, orchestrated by Joseph Stalin. The purge was driven by Stalin's paranoia and desire to eliminate any potential threats to his absolute control over the Communist Party and the Soviet state. It targeted many individuals, including political opponents, military leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens, accused of being enemies of the people. Stalin's primary targets were members of the Communist Party, who were seen as potential rivals or dissenters. High-ranking party officials, such as Lev Kamenev, Grigory Zinoviev, and Nikolai Bukharin, who had once been prominent Bolshevik leaders, were accused of conspiring against Stalin. Many of these individuals supported Stalin's rise to power, but later fell out of favor due to their perceived lack of loyalty or ideological disagreements. The military was another critical target. Stalin feared that the Red Army, with its independent power base and respected leaders, could pose a threat to his rule. In 1937, he ordered a massive purge of the military, resulting in the execution or imprisonment of a significant portion of the officer corps, including Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky and several other top commanders. This decimation of the military leadership had long-lasting detrimental effects on the Soviet armed forces, particularly in the early stages of World War II. Intellectuals, academics, and artists were also not spared. Stalin's regime viewed independent thought and cultural expression as potential threats. Many writers, poets, and scholars were arrested, and their works were censored or banned. The purges stifled creativity and intellectual development, instilling a climate of fear and conformity. The mechanisms of the Great Purge were brutal and systematic. Show trials were a hallmark of this period, where high-profile individuals were publicly tried on fabricated espionage, sabotage, and treason charges. These trials were heavily scripted, with forced confessions extracted through torture and intimidation. The defendants, often prominent party members and military leaders, were paraded before the public in a spectacle designed to demonstrate the regime's vigilance against internal threats. The outcomes of these show trials were predetermined, with most defendants being sentenced to death or long terms of imprisonment. The executions were swift and carried out with little regard for legal procedures. In addition to the show trials, countless individuals were arrested in secret and subjected to summary executions without any form of trial. Imprisonment in the Gulag, a network of forced labor camps, was another common fate for those caught in the purge. Millions of people, including political prisoners, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens, were sent to these camps, where they endured harsh conditions, forced labor, and high mortality rates. The consequences of the Great Purge were devastating. It's estimated that between 600,000 and 1.2 million people were executed during this period, with millions more imprisoned or exiled. The death toll and widespread repression had a profound impact on Soviet society, instilling a pervasive atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Stalin's policy of deportations and ethnic cleansing began well before World War II and targeted various minority groups within the Soviet Union. One of the earliest and most notable deportations occurred in 1937, when Stalin ordered the forced relocation of approximately 172,000 ethnic Koreans from the Soviet Far East to Central Asia. This decision was driven by Stalin's fear of Japanese espionage and the belief that Koreans could act as a fifth column due to Japan's proximity and influence. The Koreans were forcibly moved to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in harsh conditions, with inadequate preparation and resources for the journey. Many perished due to starvation, disease, and the harsh climate. During World War II, the scale and intensity of ethnic deportations increased significantly. In 1939, after the Soviet invasion of Poland, Stalin targeted the Polish population. Hundreds of thousands of Poles, including military officers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens, were deported to Siberia and Kazakhstan. Many of these deportees faced brutal conditions, leading to high mortality rates. Following the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin ordered the deportation of ethnic Germans living in the Volga region and other areas. These Germans were accused of potential collaboration with the enemy and were sent to remote regions in Siberia and Central Asia. In 1944, Stalin directed the mass deportation of the Chechen and Ingush populations from the North Caucasus. Accused of collaborating with the Nazis, nearly 500,000 Chechens and Ingush were forcibly moved to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The deportations were executed with extreme brutality, leading to significant loss of life during transit and upon arrival in inhospitable regions. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania also suffered extensive deportations. Following the Soviet annexation of these countries in 1940 and the subsequent reoccupation in 1944, tens of thousands of Balts were deported to Siberian labor camps. These deportations aimed to suppress resistance and dismantle the national identity of these regions. The methods of deportation were uniformly harsh and inhumane. People were often given little to no warning and were forced to leave their homes with minimal belongings. They were transported in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, typically in unheated cattle cars, leading to high mortality rates from exposure, starvation, and disease. The Gulag, an acronym for Glavnoye Upravlение Lageryai, Main Camp Administration, was a vast network of forced labor camps established by the Soviet government under Joseph Stalin. The system began in the 1920s and expanded significantly during the 1930s and 1940s. The gulags were used to incarcerate a wide range of individuals, including political prisoners, criminals, ethnic minorities, and anyone deemed a threat to the state. At its peak, the Gulag system encompassed thousands of camps spread across the Soviet Union, from the Arctic Circle to the steppes of Central Asia. Life in the gulags was extraordinarily harsh and brutal. Prisoners endured grueling physical labor, extreme climates, and deplorable living conditions. Camps were typically located in remote, inhospitable regions, where temperatures could drop to lethal levels in winter. Prisoners were housed in overcrowded, poorly insulated barracks, often without adequate clothing or heating. The treatment of prisoners was severe. Guards enforced strict discipline, and any infraction, real or perceived, could result in brutal punishment, including beatings, solitary confinement, and extended sentences. The food was minimal and of poor quality, leading to widespread malnutrition and starvation. Medical care was virtually non-existent, and diseases such as typhus, tuberculosis, and dysentery were rampant. Survival rates in the gulags were low. It's estimated that millions of people perished due to the harsh conditions, overwork, and neglect. The exact number of deaths is complex to determine, but some estimates suggest that up to 1.5 million people died in the camps. The psychological toll was also immense, with many survivors suffering long-term trauma from their experiences. One of the most infamous projects was the construction of the White Sea-Baltic Canal, built between 1931 and 1933. Thousands of prisoners worked under appalling conditions, and many died during the construction. The canal itself was poorly designed and rarely used, illustrating the often wasteful and inhumane nature of Gulag labor. So, what lessons can we learn from Stalin's reign of terror to prevent such atrocities from happening again? Please let us know in the comments section below, and remember to like and share. Also, hit the subscribe button to get notifications on the latest uploads on the channel. As always, see you in the following video.